The Joker and Batwoman have shown something that I think some of you who are younger millennials, if you're in your late 20s and your early 30s, I believe your parents should still be of the age that they remember this phrase. Hey, honey, should we go and see that flick? Well, the critics really panned it, so we should go and see it. That's it. That's how it really worked. Back when there were VHS tapes, back when it was when me and my dad were in that line around the corner for E.T., around the corner for Empire Strikes Back. Buildings made of marble with columns. Beautiful old buildings. Chandeliers were still intact. You still had leather and brass at the snack bar and such like. Sometimes some of these theaters had not renovated completely. So you would still see like a smoking section, like an area so that the grown folks, while the kids and the women were buying snacks, the men could sit and smoke a cigarette, or the other way around, you know, and you could be in the area where you could smoke, and then you could go inside the theater. So you didn't bother the people in the theater with your smoking, which there were smoking sections. Some of you might remember the smoking section of a theater. Critics, like one of the biggest, most well-known jokes about the 70s is that the critics were old, they were morons. They were the least talented people at the newspaper. There were two critics that were just, these people were worthless. And they were always in media. If you were to watch a movie or a TV show and they showed the movie critic or they showed the food critic, foodies is what we call them now. These were always obviously snitty homosexual men who were dressed gauche. They were ostentatious and ridiculous. There were Brian Stelters. There are these absolutely insanely flamboyant Brian Stelters. Firestein, wasn't it like Firestein was one of these people for years? I think that's my recollection of him. I bet in the comments, some of you, I bet Waterpenny, I bet you remember one of these guys. That he was just this outrageously gay East Coast critic, and for some reason he would show up every so often. Like by the end of the 90s, these people would randomly kind of pop up on a show, like telling you about how like the new Les Mis is just the most Les Mis has ever been, just so Rotten Tomatoes. This is the whole thing with the culture of it. This is why Yelp went horribly wrong. This is why now, comment sections are being closed, and it's like, no, Rotten Tomatoes shows. You got to get these people who are only good enough with words that somebody liked their writing. Who knows if they can actually really get anybody to read it, if they get paid for anything. But that's the issue with critics. They're these people who you just have no idea where they exist. Like, what do these people do? You just don't know. Like, because you're like, people pay people for that shit? So, yeah, Rotten Tomatoes has now it's just over. I love how Trump has separated the wheat from the chaff in society now. I mean, that's all it is. It's all it is. It's just now all this stuff that sucks, all these activities that nobody wanted us to be involved in, that now it's like, oh, look, it's covered in blood and baby pieces. Maybe we shouldn't have anything to do with that. Oh, China reeks of death. It's really weird. It's just like, yeah, we shouldn't have given them most. Clinton shouldn't have given them most favored trade status. We should have regularly renegotiated international treaties and systems of inter-alliances. One of the most important lessons that Americans ever learned was this from history. Don't get involved in other people's fucking shit. And still, finally, this is all showing out. And one of the best things of all is the culture war. And now we're seeing it, that when it's actually a view into the mind of somebody, and it goes into, could you become a madman? Could you become this? The villain is you. Like that. There's all kinds of there's all kinds of. But when it's a hero, who's kind of beyond, almost bizarre. That's there's kind of a very specific kind of arc to the heroic story in a way. There's kind of we have lots of models for how the hero is presented. And just to see that 10% upvote for Batwoman isn't, I'm sure Batgirl, Batwoman, all I am sure there's been 20 years of writing behind that character. This is the issue I have really with the comic book movies. My most fundamental issue was not since, I believe, for me it was Batman Begins, was the closest thing to anything that I had ever seen in any comic. Spider-Man. In Spider-Man. Nothing else. Nothing else was even remotely like any of the comics. And it kind of stood alone. But I'm like, you do understand that you've made your storyline actually shockingly short and limited. Because you decided to do nothing that would have been in the comic series itself. You have used all this CG. You have insisted on not animating it. Great. That fucking makes sense. That makes so much sense. You spent all this money on these really famous people. You use all this CG, but oh no, don't animate a movie based on comic books. No. That's silly pants. Why use Blender? Why use SFM? Those are for porno. Those are for that's what it's made for. It's not made to make major amazing movies that you could actually do and not have to have an actor stay young forever. You don't have to find the perfect actress. You can just animate her. I don't know. To me, it seems like there's all these issues that they could have solved with I think in my view, it would have been forethought on how much you could clean up by having something like almost the entire original Batman. That should have lasted forever. But no, Joker's dead. First movie. The whole reason we saw it was for Nicholson. I want to make this very clear. No. We watched it because Jack Nicholson was in it. I was there. I was a full-grown adult. We watched it because Jack Nicholson was in it. Nobody understood why Keaton was Batman. This made no sense to anyone. We had one homeboy who was like, no, it's cool. I'm like, but he doesn't look like Batman. Well, but he's got armor. No, he doesn't look even remotely like Batman. Well, that's not important. And I'm like, what is. But they could have chosen anyone. Like, there's people with black hair in Hollywood. Like, there's people with straight black hair in Hollywood. Really, there's a whole lot of them, actually. It's sort of like a coincidence, you know? But, so, um, I never go off on movie and foodie stuff too much because at a certain point, I realized you consumed so much visual media from the 80s and 90s. You absolutely can never own a television, have a cable thing. No. YouTube alone is its own problem. I'm yeah, its own problem for me. Thank God I can't really use any of these complicated platforms or talking to people and yeah, I don't know how I don't know how Jim deals with all that business. Um, but yeah, I knew Rotten Tomatoes. I'm like, oh God, movie rating thing. And then when I started to hear that there was a percentage of this and that they do something with the numbers. They have the Rotten Tomatoes critics. Oh, that's way less bad than it was. Um, I was like, oh no, don't tell me, because the beauty of this is actually the beauty of the late '90s was when a lot of these things like Yelp, in a way, I remember when it first popped up. That was early 2000s, if I remember. This was kind of cool because it was just like a comment section, almost like it was like a board. I mean, it was just a complicated message board in a way, and but once you started to realize people were just fucking around, leaving dickish ass shit on there and stuff, and it's just like, you peasant motherfucker, why you God damn it, and be glad you got a trough, pig. It's just, there's some people in America that you kind of, when you see like what their criticisms of a place that they got to eat out, and there's these times where I think back in the day, like what restaurants and everything was like, how much stuff cost back in just my lifetime, that I'm just like, no, you don't understand what it was like to go out in the day. It was beautiful. These places were amazing. Oh my God, I still remember my one time my grandfather bringing us to an Italian place, and they still had the man who seated you fully suited. He everything ran. This guy was giving hand signals. He's whispering to people. People are bringing me free stuff because I'm the kid. I'm like, what? This is amazing. Brass, leather. God, the smell of leather in some of those places when I was a kid. Still remember that. Because my grandparents were really big on me understanding culture. Really big on that. And so it to me, it's now just funny. I just laugh. Culture and sophistication. And I just laugh. Because I see it now. It's all just, it rhymes. It all just rhymes. Critics sucked then. They suck now. This goes back to the 20s and 30s. You could find this in the 20s and 30s. People are, the critics. What do the critics know? That's there we go. What do the critics know? That's the line. I'd forgotten it. What do the critics? What do they know? Reading the paper. Oh yeah. Well, what do they know? And that's true. There's actually a long history of. I know Razor Fist could probably do a breakdown of 20, 30 great films that had been absolutely panned by the critics. Like, some of you would never even believe. Like, I forget, like, I want to say, like, something like Blade Runner might have even been one of these. Like, there's these just movies that you're like, what? The critics hated that? You're like, yeah. Like, and yeah. I mean, I could still remember The whole thing with Ghost in the Shells, it began as an art house thing. There was no such thing as watching anime in a movie theater. Then that didn't happen. There were these weird theaters that would have art movies in town. And ours was at the Golden Gateway Apartments in San Francisco. There was they would have these avant-garde art films a lot of times, or old stuff that you really needed a nice theater to play it in. And so that was where like Ghost in the Shell or Akira would play, because they were just so, people who understood what they were seeing were like, this has to be seen in our theater. Our house has to have this work playing it. It's yeah. It was once this yeah. Imagine what people once thought film could be. Now it's hot take. Hot take Donovan. Oh yeah. Hot take Donovan. Drink coffee way too late at night. And so but the critics, they've always done this. So be glad that you finally have seen it. This means that the rhyme is happening, the poetry of your time. It's come to that part of it. And the critics, what do they know? Da, 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 da. And and that's the part of the song. You've gotten to that part of it. It's like, oh, I remember that part. That part rhymed with the part. Yeah, I remember when I was about your age, something like that happened. What do the critics know?